So, this is about the main language patterns that I use in every conversational hypnosis session that I do. And this is what I teach in my course. So, I'm going to just take you through. I'm going to share with you here the phases of conversational hypnosis. And I'll do this in two videos. So, I'm going to just start at the very beginning, the very first initial phase of conversational hypnosis, the way I do it, is to investigate. So, the easiest way to investigate is to simply ask somebody, what's the problem? That's exactly how I begin. Now, you can reframe this if you want in different ways, like, what are you doing here? What brings you here today? How can I help you? What are you excited to, achieve? But for me, the simpler the better. So, what's the problem? Is enough to awaken that inner exploration. So when you ask somebody that question, they have to first go internal. They have to go into a place where they can answer that kind of super, super initial basic inquiry. And it's so funny, like I was doing a session with a practice session, a demo yesterday, and the person who was the so-called client is also a hypnotist. So I know she was expecting me to say, what's the problem? Because I trained her to say that. But even though she knew that, as soon as I said it, boom, she was instantly like, oh, what is the problem? Why did I come here? So do it just for yourself in your head. Ask yourself, what's the problem? And you'll notice that you have that initial going inward. And that is the first invitation to your subconscious mind. So, this is how I begin. Now, when you begin with that kind of simple invitation, you also allow the client to show you, is my response going to be conscious or is it going to be more subconscious? And so, what they answer, this initial question, means a lot and tells you a lot because as the practitioner, you're going to immediately know, okay, have we gone off into like a conscious, uh, whatever it is, symptom hunting, or have we, started to circulate around a problem that isn't really the problem? Are we going into theories, or is this person really beginning to unravel something? And so both are correct. It doesn't matter which one they give you, but it tells you a lot about what is going to come next. So based on that initial answer, you can develop into the next question. What's the problem is super important because this is like starting blocks is the image I have here. It's to represent the fact that that question starts where the client themselves is. Where the client is where they invite you to come. Instead of you saying, okay, tell me about your childhood, or okay, tell me about, what happened to you back in the day, because that's the practitioner telling the client where to begin. Or in some methods, you say, okay, let's do a regression right away. You go into the past. What do you see? Who's there? That's again you telling them to do it. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is let the client suggest to you where they're going to take you. So when you ask what's the problem, you're really inviting that client driven identification of where to begin. And I cannot underscore enough how important that is to me. The location of the first knot that needs to be unraveled is revealed by the direction or tone or structure, texture of the answer to the initial question, what's the problem? As I inquire more into what the client thinks the problem is, they begin to lead me into what really makes the problem a problem for them. And that is super, super important because everybody's problem has a different meaning to them and everybody has generated their problem for a different reason. So, what I want to know is where does the client see the impasse? What can we do to allow the client subconscious to reveal the directionality of that unfolding, of that dissolving of the knot? So, what's the problem is that initial invitation into um, where the conversation is going to go. Like I said at the start, the main thing that happens when you say to somebody, what's the problem? Even if I say it to you now and you're already on the topic, so you're expecting me to say it. But even if I say it now, so what's the problem in your life? The first thing that happens is you have to think like, what is the problem? Like, let's go into some kind of investigative curiosity. So putting the attention internally is always the hypnotist's job. That's the first thing I always want to do. So what's the problem guarantees that I get that internality. The symptom and unconscious payoff are not the same thing, right? So the symptom is the conscious version of the problem. What the client answers, if the answer to what the problem is conscious, it's going to be related to the symptoms they're experiencing. If the answer they give to what's the problem begins to take us into an unconscious area, then we'll get closer and closer to the reason why that symptom is there, to the reason the person thinks that symptom is useful to them, which they don't themselves know, probably, because if they did know, they wouldn't be there asking for your help to get rid of whatever it is. So what's the problem is an entry point, and the whole interview, the whole investigation of the problem is an entry point into beginning to really decipher and delineate between symptom and unconscious payoff. And let me just say, unconscious payoff is a topic I can talk about, for a long time and deserves its own investigation and video. But ultimately, what it is the thing you get even when you keep your habits or your addictive, behaviors. What do you get out of that? You get something out of it. Well, what is it? That's the thing people don't really recognize or know what it is. Why are they doing the thing that they don't want to be doing? That's what I'm investigating when I'm doing this investigative interview. What's the problem also just starts the conversation. It just builds rapport. You say to somebody kind of casually, okay, so tell me what's the problem. Already they're talking instead of, hey, how you doing? Nice shoes, isn't it a great day outside? Where's the parking? Whatever. So what's the problem is a good conversation starter. It's even if it doesn't work initially, even if it creates a conscious moment instead of an unconscious moment, it does invite the client to immediately search for their own unconscious problem. So it sets that mission in progress, whatever the directionality of it is. And as that conversation progresses from what's the problem on, more and more description and context is given for why the problem exists and why it persists and what the client is getting out of it. So no matter what kind of answers you get, there's going to be data. And whatever data you get, that's going to be insightful and useful. Finally, another thing that happens when you just begin very casually with what's the problem is everything begins. The session begins, the untying of the knots, the solving of problems begins, and the invitation to trance begins as well. So I kind of call it like a sandwich. It's like various layers of things that need to be accomplished are all accomplished immediately, all in one. And that's kind of why this method is very time compressed and very speedy, because many things are happening concurrently, and that's by design, that's on purpose. And so then from the question of what's the problem, we're going to just investigate more and find out how is it a problem for you. So there's no need to assume anything from my perspective, from the hypnotist perspective about the problem. Maybe what I think is the problem about the problem is not the problem. Maybe the real problem why a person thinks something is a problem is because of some, factor that I don't even know what it is. Like, because everybody thinks smoking, is bad for your health doesn't mean that that's the reason it's a problem for everyone. Maybe it's this, price for somebody. Maybe it's their relationship. It could be anything. So we never assume, just ask, how is this a problem? Tell me more about how this is a problem for you. And as you ask more and more about how this is a problem, you add a lot of dimension and context to the interview stage. And that's what we're looking for, is to build that information, to build that encyclopedia of information about why the problem was generated the way it was for the client. And so we're just increasing the search all the time, like with a magnifying glass. Just keep it, looking and looking and looking. I resist asking, why is it a problem? Or why did that become a problem? Because then you invite the client to justify or to kind of give a defense, well, this is why. It becomes a conscious kind of, a defense mechanism. So that's not what I want to do. I don't want to create that feeling of like, well, why did it become a problem? That's stupid or something. That's not my intention. My intention is to widen the inquiry, to deepen the inquiry, and to give it more perspective and dimension. Like, very often, what really helps people is just allowing all the reasons the problem came into view to be seen concurrently or at once. And that's a kind of hypnosis, because it creates like a timeline therapy, a holographic timeline. And that holographic timeline allows people to see themselves in dimensions, in many dimensions. So we're not trying to find out why something happened or for them to justify or defend themselves. We're asking, tell me more about what's bothering you and how it affects you and how you built that and what it's doing for you. And what stops you from changing it is one of my favorite questions. What makes you keep going with this instead of stopping? The reason you can ask what stops you and get a really good answer out of it is because now you're looking at the mechanics of the problem. Like, oh, so you have this problem, and what stops you from stopping? Oh, so it's this other thing over here, and what is that? And so you see, now we're building this kind of investigation of the problem, like a detective, hypnotic detective. And as the detective is going through her process, she's developing this trance experience in which the client can really review more options than they knew they had, or more reasons. And so that's exactly what this slide is about. And now, as you get invited into that, you increase the search. The search deepens. The search gets more holographic and more curious and more interesting. And people start to say things like, oh, yeah, I never realized that. I never thought of that. Oh, how did you know that? That's when you start to get those breakthroughs of like, oh, that's crazy. How did I not realize that? Or, oh, so I can just change that. How do I get to that place? Well, it's this way, by creating that depth of field so that the client can have perspective and do their own um, map making for an exit strategy. I do not ask, why can't you stop doing this? Because then I'm going to invite the client to make an excuse. So again, my perspective is never provocative. It's never to like provoke an argument or to provoke a defense or to make the client feel in any way belittled or bad. It's not that at all. It's very much about allowing more light to be shed on whatever it is, an honest, raw inquiry, which allows the subconscious to come forward and contribute. And so the next step beyond that is to elicit some kind of feeling experience beyond the explanation giving. So after we've asked what's the problem and how is this a problem, we're just going to ask very simply, once we've talked about the problem, now we're going to have looked at more possibilities and more information. How are you feeling right now? And how did that make you feel? And what do you think of that problem? And then I'm going to assess the emotional charge. You're going to assess what the client says. Are they going to say, oh, yeah, it made me feel really this way, or it really made me uncomfortable? I don't feel anything, or I don't know. And in fact, I expect clients to say, I don't know. That's a good thing, because now they're thinking about what you're asking them. And when they say, I don't know, they're being honest with you instead of pretending like they might in regular therapy. And so I don't know is always an invitation to ask something else. Not what would happen if you do know. That would not be the right thing to ask, because now again, you're provoking the client or making them defensive. So the ETM, or the emotional trance experience, is something that comes naturally from investigating the problem and then investigating what the effects of the problem are, because now the client is going to be having an emotionalized experience, which is exactly what we want. We want the client's experience to be fully dimensioned, fully embodied, so that their subconscious can connect to all the parts of themselves. And that's what really creates that integrative healing experience. But as you can see, it's built on very simple organic principles. Not anything fancy, not any script, not any induction, not telling people what to think or what to do, but simply saying, what's the problem? And how is that a problem? And allowing that to lead the conversation and to build the rapport. And from there, trance has been created very naturally and very organically and with a very solid foundation in trust. And then we can say, so what is the feeling of that? And now I'm going to make a part 2 of this video as well, because as the hypnosis now unfolds, there's a different thing we can do other than investigate. So I'm going to talk about that as well. And so how I fold all of this together into a session that's transformative is the no bullshit method. Because there's no bullshit here. There's no frills. I'm just going to show you how to read the client's response and how to feed back to them what you're getting from them so that you create a very symbiotic capsule experience, which is what hypnosis is. So I can't wait to teach you. The next training is coming up soon. So please join if you have any questions. Of course, you're welcome to ask. Everything is pre-recorded. I mean, not pre-recorded, but recorded. So if you can't be there live, of course, you can watch later. We have a wonderful Facebook group of students as well that you get to join. Unlimited access to any live event now or in the future. So it's a great package. If you have any questions about it, please ask me. This is Maya Elephant. I'm not a medical doctor or a mental health care practitioner. And thanks for watching.